Okay, so now we have this working so that we can send the detail view from here from the navigation controller or the master controller to the detail view. And now what we need to do is be able to send them back, but we don't. We don't send objects back. When we add objects, we build them in here, and the detail view saves them to the list. And when we edit objects, the detail view replaces what's in the list with the new values. So once these values come in, we don't really use them anymore. And I did, if I remember right, save one piece of code down here. So I'm going to open up my add member view controller Swift file because I want this segue. That's all I need. So I'm going to highlight this segue, prepare for segue command, copy it. And then I'm going back to my detail view controller, and it doesn't have a prepare for segue because when we originally built it, when it was built for us, it didn't need a segue, so it doesn't have one. But now that it is a modal, we can add the segue.
Are we adding that to?
The detail view down at the bottom. If it's cancel, we don't want to do anything, just go back. So that's done. But if it's dismiss and save, I hope that's what I call this one. So I'll take a quick look and make sure the segue is dismiss and save. Because that can cause you more trouble than anything else as you sit there write all this beautiful code. It's because you mistyped either the name here or in your code. They have to match exactly, and it looks like I got it right. So then in the detail view controller, if the identifier is dismiss and save, we now need to figure out, do we have a member index? So we could use this if index equals member index again to see if it's there. Because if it's not, that means we're adding. So I'm just going to steal this line of code and bring it down here. And I think I'm going to insert it at the top, right underneath the if segue. So now I'm checking to see what's the index. If it exists, we use it to replace. If it doesn't exist, we use it to add. So I'm going to add an else to this first. Else. I need another curly bracket. If it exists, we're going to replace, but if it doesn't exist, then we're going to take the existing data and we're going to add, and actually I think this let statement, new member, can be way at the top because we're going to need to create the new member regardless. What we're doing here is simply taking what's on the form and creating a brand new family member from it. We have to do that regardless. If the index doesn't exist, then we add this new member to family members. If the index does exist, then we replace it. Family.members.replace with new member, add index, index. Now I'll also warn you in advance that this didn't quite work for me. But I was using a different technique, so this may work now. We'll see. Does that make sense?
So if there's an index number, like I said, otherwise don't.
Yep. If it was already there, replace it. Otherwise, add it. So let's start with the add, because that one did work. Doesn't mean it still does. I'm now in uncharted waters, just so you know, because when I first did this, when I got this to work before I came to class, I was using a shared variable. And I'll show you the brief version of it, but it had some issues. So I'm going to add a member. Comes up nice and blank. Where's my keyboard? Okay, add a member, and let's add John Doe, and we'll leave him born yesterday. Still haven't added any code. I guess I did add some code to get rid of the keyboard, not my sample one at home. And now I should be able to save that, and John Doe should show up on my list. Cool. Click. John Doe, today's date. Cancel. Cool. Go back to Volker. Seems to be working. So we're making progress. Now I'm going to edit Volker. Just adding S's, changing the date because I want to see that things actually change. So pick any record and add an X to the end or something. And now here's where my fingers are crossed. Save.
Saved it.
It does work, but it doesn't update the display.
Thank you. We all agree. Because if I switch to a net, cancel, go back to Volker, the S's and the date have changed, but it didn't update the display.
Which is interesting because it wasn't the table view earlier with John Doe.
When it adds it, it updates.
When it adds it, it seems to be updating it, but when it's editing it, it says there's already an element there. And so it's not really editing it. And I wonder if we would be...
What if you removed the old index and added a new one?
I'm just thinking the same thing, that if I remove it completely and add it, then it will show up. I'm guessing that will work.
It'll show up out of order, but what if you add that specific index?
I think maybe because
You remove it at that index and then add it to that index.
Because we have the index,
what it's
right?
doing,
Right,
it's replacing the index.
it is replacing.
No, it's replacing the data at that index, right? It's replacing the data at that index, and I think that's why it's not updating the view.
So can we just call the new information in the statement?
We need to somehow tell it that we've updated the list. All right. Now the question is, where does that happen? All right. But the good news is this is working the same way here now that so far my office is still working pretty solid. I was getting the same results. I'm not getting an update here. If we kill it and run it, that isn't going to help any because then we start completely over again.
Is there a table view refresh data or something like that?
There is something like that, right? And then the question is, where do we put it?
That the view did load maybe of the master.
That's my first thought. But Adam's onto something, I can tell by his eyes.
No, well, I tried to, in the replace method
Yeah.
of family, I tried to remove that index and then append the new member. And then it doesn't work. It actually, they're listed, but, so I have 4 family members.
Mhm.
I changed the 3rd family member.
Yes.
When I went back, when I now click the 3rd member, it's now the 4th member, but it still has the name of the 3rd member, so it still doesn't update the view. If there's,
So there's something, one of the things I read somewhere along the way is that when you add these buttons up here and give them names, they have some predefined stuff that goes with them. So I think what happens is when we're doing a plus, it's sending a signal back to the table view controller that you need to add this to the end of the table. Versus a replace or a save, which doesn't update it. So
Would
that's,
you add it in the save?
pardon me?
Would you add it in save as part of the segue? Set it on the master view?
Can you add it, where do you want to put it? I'm going to go, here's the master view.
Because the add one is basically a segue, right? And that refreshes the table view. when you
But I
go
think
back.
the add has got built into that kind of segue, that it's an adding. Okay, so it's saving, but what we need is some kind of a command, and Nick's theory is if we put it into, I don't know, it's not view did load, but it might be awake from nib.
Something like that.
Right, because view did load, I know that it doesn't refill the sample data every single time. Now that would be another option. Ooh, let's try that. Now that'll add them over and over and over again, but
It'll
that'll,
tell you if it works or not.
yeah, it'll tell me if it works. That's true. So let's give it a shot. Run. And it should work. I'm going to get 6 records now is my guess. Because both of these executed. If I change this one to an S on Voker save, now I got 9. So it's doing what I want it to do, but it still didn't.
Well, those were the 3 that got added, probably,
Yeah, it's just adding,
but it still didn't change. The top one is probably Volker's, yeah.
Yeah. And now look, it's going out of control. Oh no.
So many goals.
but that makes
But
sense.
this, what we need is the command that says refresh to view, not fill the data again. Okay, and there is a command, and I'm going to pause the recording and run back to my office, because in my office I have Devon's from last year, and the command is in there, and if I can find the command, that might help. But what we also, let me see if I can find it. So let me, okay, to get it to save changes, what I needed, what I found in some Stack Overflow site was this function that is called view will appear. We were adding or trying to add the code in awake from nib, which is kind of left over from the old days. I'm surprised it's still there. Okay. Trying to get it from there, and view did load didn't work. And so I found this view, which wasn't one of the default functions that gets left behind when you create these things, and added the table reload data in there, and it worked. At least it seems to, so let's just do another test. So here's the Voker, and we'll add an X and change the date. Doesn't matter. That part was working. It was changing the date, no problem, but it wasn't updating the view, but now it does. So I'm going to end this recording there. On Wednesday, what I hope to have ready for you is the ability to customize these cells. I think last year I made that extra credit, but I have it in my notes from last year. Maybe watch your email. Maybe I won't be able to do that, and I'll basically make Wednesday a lab for you to start working on part 2. Your part 2 is to make the same thing happen for your apps, make them edit. Currently it says 30 points. Considering now that we've figured it out, it's not terribly hard. I think we're going to downgrade that to 20. Unless we put some custom cells in there, then I might put it back up. So right now, if nothing changes, it's 20, but if we add custom cells, then it'll become 30.